This weekend marks President Joe Biden's 80th birthday, but the big party at the White House is for a much more recent event. The oldest granddaughter of Vice President Joe Biden, Naomi, wed Peter Neal on Saturday on the south lawn of the White House. The day after the wedding, Biden will become the first octogenarian president in American history, bringing attention to the main problem that Biden's opponents have with him: his age. Despite a string of recent victories, including better-than-expected midterm results for Democrats, a trip to Egypt and Asia that was largely incident-free, and a lackluster presidential announcement from his former rival, Donald Trump, Biden is still the oldest president America has ever had. However, a glamorous nuptial between two 20-somethings, beginning a new life chapter with music, dancing, and celebration, might inject youth into the 80th birthday weekend. According to two people acquainted with the wedding planning, it was not a coincidence. The president's day falls on Naomi Biden's wedding weekend. It should be noted that Biden never wants to draw attention to the age issue. The intimate Biden family will start having serious discussions about whether Joe Biden should run for re-election after the wedding, in a way. After the wedding, Jill Biden and Joe Biden will head to Nantucket, Massachusetts, for the Thanksgiving holiday. Christmas will soon follow, and the time is running out for Biden to decide whether he will run for president again in 2024 or not. The First Lady and the President have both stated that they will weigh the benefits and drawbacks of a second run, which is something Biden has previously stated he intends to do. There are three distinct parts to the wedding itself. The wedding took place on the South Lawn, a location that had never been used for a White House wedding. It was scheduled to start around 11:15 Eastern Time and end at 11:50 Eastern Time. The source had earlier confirmed that there was no tent, which made for a chilly outdoor morning with a temperature of 39 degrees. Visitors were given COVID-19 tests as soon as they entered the White House complex on Saturday morning. At their seats, blankets and shawls were placed for their comfort. The bride's parents, Hunter Biden and Kathleen Buell, reportedly led the bride down the aisle, according to two people with knowledge of the wedding specifics. The band played Bittersweet Symphony by The Verve as Naomi Biden made her way down the aisle. According to the same sources, the bride wore a long-sleeved Ralph Lauren gown with a train and a veil. Peter Neal and Betty Thumb, the two grandmothers of Neal, were escorted to their seats by Joe Biden, a source said. The source claims that the president turned around and performed a classic Biden jog up the aisle to meet the First Lady and lead her to their seats. According to the program, Naomi's sister Roberta Mabel Biden, also known as Maisie, and Catherine Elizabeth Neal, served as the bridesmaids and maid of honor, respectively. Robert Elliott Neal, his brother, served as the groom's best man, and Charles W. Gertz and Joseph Robinette Biden IV were listed as the groomsmen. During the ceremony, Dr. William Neal, Peter's father, sang a song while being accompanied by vocalists, the source claimed. The poem Carry Your Heart With Me by E. Cummings was also read, this time by Amy D'Amato. In a statement issued by the White House on Saturday, the President and First Lady said, "It has been a joy to watch Naomi grow, discover who she is, and carve out such an incredible life for herself. At this point, we are thrilled that she chose Peter as her husband, and we feel privileged to have him join our family. We wish them joyful days and a love that deepens with every year that goes by." Former Senators Chris Dodd of Connecticut and Ted Kaufman of Delaware, as well as Secretary of State Tony Blinken and his wife, Evan Ryan, a former White House cabinet secretary, were notable attendees. After the vows were exchanged, a small luncheon with just the wedding party and family was held in the White House. A little over 325 people, more than showed up for the ceremony, were invited to the White House for dancing and dessert on Saturday night as part of the celebration. The black tie event started around 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time and was supposed to go until midnight. Naomi Biden and her husband Peter Neal used a small ladder to climb up and cut into an upper tier of a large 7-tier wedding cake that was set up in the Blue Room. Slices of cake were distributed to guests as parting gifts, following a custom started by Lucy Johnson, Tricia Nixon, and Linda Johnson at their White House receptions. The state dining room had dessert stations set up, and the East Room stage had a big band playing. According to the two witnesses, the bride wore a strapless Rima-Cra gown. Later in the evening, she was supposed to change into a different party gown. She is literally the grandchild closest to her grandfather. In a way, Naomi Biden, 28, was able to attend a wedding at the White House, thanks in large part to her own initiative. Biden, a law clerk at Arnold and Porter in Washington, D.C., encouraged her grandfather to start running. After delivering his acceptance speech for the Republican Party's nomination for re-election on the final day of the Republican National Convention on the South Lawn of the White House in Washington, D.C., on August 27, 2020, despite being the patriarch, Joe Biden has always considered his extended family, including his 5 oldest grandchildren, when making decisions about his life. He struggles with his sensitivity to their feelings, as well as the intrusiveness of a nasty political conflict. In a video interview shown at the 2020 Democratic National Convention, Naomi Biden stated, "I don't think there has been any decision, no matter how big or small, that we haven't decided as a family. The most important, in-person, all-hands-on-deck family meeting, the one that would have the biggest influence on Joe Biden's future, was called by Naomi Biden, despite the fact that the elder Biden family members typically make the calls. They were concerned, but Biden was. He mistakenly believed that we were calling a meeting to discuss whether or not we wanted him to run when, in fact, we were telling him to get in that race. Naomi Biden said, "Get moving." Since then, Naomi has been the person who has publicly spoken out on her social media platforms about democratic issues and defended her grandfather. She tweeted on November 12 that democracy wins in the Senate. Never assume that your vote is insignificant. In a real sense, Naomi is also the grandchild closest to her parents. According to a source with knowledge of the living arrangements, she and Neal, 25, a recent graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Law School who works at the Georgetown University Law Center on National Security, moved into the White House last August. Their involvement in the planning was only heightened by their proximity to the couple's wedding venue. The main person involved in the wedding planning was Jill Biden, who collaborated with Brian Raffanelli, the founder of Raffanelli Events. Raffanelli is no stranger to throwing extravagant parties at the White House. He oversaw 7 state dinners during the administration of Barack Obama, including the final state dinner for Italy, which featured a glass-ceiling tent on the South Lawn, and a Gwen Stefani performance. The cost of a Raffanelli-produced wedding is high. Many of his events have starting prices of around $300,000, and can cost millions of dollars. The Biden family will be paying for the wedding-related activities that take place at the White House, according to Jill Biden's communications director Elizabeth Alexander. This is consistent with other private events hosted by the first family, and following the traditions of previous White House wedding festivities in prior administrations. Both of Naomi Biden's parents, who divorced in 2017, have written autobiographies detailing their relationship's difficulties, many of which were influenced by Hunter Biden's protracted battle with addiction. On Saturday, November 19, 2022, on the South Lawn of the White House, President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden attend Peter and Naomi Biden Neal's wedding. At the White House in 1874, Nellie Rachel Grant, the president's daughter, wed Algernon Sartorius. Only President Grover Cleveland has been married in the White House. In 1886, he wed Frances Folsom. On their wedding day in 1906, Alice Roosevelt and Nicholas Longworth were joined by Alice's father, President Theodore Roosevelt, on the left. Frances Bowes Sarah and Jessie Woodrow Wilson, the president's daughter, were married in 1913. The youngest daughter of Woodrow Wilson, Eleanor, on her wedding day in 1914. During the wedding of Louise Macy and Harry Hopkins in 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt were present. Hopkins, who later held the position of Secretary of Commerce, was a close friend of President Roosevelt. When she married Chuck Robb in 1967, Linda Bird Johnson, the president's daughter, cut a piece of cake. Tricia Nixon's wedding to Edward Finch Cox took place in the White House Rose Garden in 1971, and President Richard Nixon escorted his daughter there. In 1994, during the Rose Garden wedding ceremonies, Anthony Rodham, Hillary Clinton's brother, poses with his bride, Nicole Boxer. On Saturday, November 19, 2022, on the South Lawn of the White House, President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden attend Peter and Naomi Biden Neal's wedding. At the White House in 1874, Nellie Rachel Grant, the president's daughter, wed Algernon Sartorius. Joe Biden favors Lauren's suits and wore one on the day of the inauguration. Jill Biden has also been spotted wearing the brand. The majority of the rumors that she will wear Ralph Lauren for at least one of her wedding looks started when Naomi, her sister Finnegan, 23, and Neal attended the designer's Fall 2022 fashion show in New York City in March. The bride will wear 2 different wedding looks, one for the ceremony and one for the reception, according to 2 familiar sources. The White House declined to comment on the dress rumors. The White House was adamant that the bride and groom wanted privacy for their nuptials, despite repeated protests from the White House Correspondents Association, asking that media coverage be permitted because the wedding is taking place at the People's House. Following a weekend spent at Camp David in Maryland, Ashley Biden, U.S. President Joe Biden, and Colonel David E. Bowling, commander of the Joint Base Meyer Henderson Hall, walked towards the motorcade at Fort Leslie J. McNair on April 17, 2022. Large matching wreaths and a floral arch surround the entrance to the diplomatic room, and white roses and other blooms were strung from the Truman balcony and woven along the stairs leading down to the South Lawn. Only 19 weddings have ever taken place at the White House. The most recent was for Pete Souza, Obama's chief photographer, who wed in the Rose Garden in 2013. In June 2008, Jenna Bush became the most recent presidential daughter to hold her wedding reception at the White House. Bush married and had a reception at the Texas ranch owned by her family months earlier, but her father, George W. Bush, hosted 600 guests at the White House for her second reception. The scale and scope of the Biden wedding, however, most closely resembled those of Lucy Johnson, who married Patrick Nugent, and Lyndon Johnson, who wed Charles Robb in the East Room of the White House in 1967. Edward Finch Cox and Tricia Nixon were wed in June 1971 beneath a white gazebo constructed in the Rose Garden and decorated with blooms. Newspapers printed the recipes for the 6-foot-tall wedding cakes in the wake of each of these nuptials, making them media darlings. The Smithsonian National Museum of American History received pieces of the Nixon cakes, as well as those made by the Johnson daughters. Nixon's, according to the White House Historical Association, hardened into a 2-inch by 2-inch piece that now resembles a dried sponge.